Hello, and welcome back to the Video Essay Podcast. I'm your host, Will DeGravio. On today's show, I am joined by one of my favorite documentary filmmakers, Alexandre Philippe. You may know Alexandre's work best from The People vs. George Lucas or 7852, which is his film on the psycho shower scene, or perhaps Leap of Faith, William Friedkin on The Exorcist, or Memory, The Origins of Alien. On today's show, we talk about his latest theatrical release, LYNCH Oz, which, as the title suggests, explores the relationship between one David Lynch and the Wizard of Oz. I first saw this film back at Fantastic Fest, which I was covering remotely, and it's really stuck with me since, so I can't wait to have a chance to see it once again, this time on the big screen. Those of us who are in New York City are very lucky because it premieres today, June 2nd, at the IFC Theater, but as it begins this theatrical run, I would encourage you all to track down the film and hopefully watch it at a theater near you. As always, you can learn more about the Video Essay Podcast at thevideoessay.com. You can also check out our online screening platform, Recycled Screenings. Again, that's at recycledscreenings.com. And subscribe to our free newsletter, Notes on Videographic Criticism, at thevideoessay.substack.com. I would also ask that you please consider subscribing to the Video Essay Podcast on YouTube. And now, here is my conversation with Alexandre Philippe. I think anyone familiar with your work, it would be no surprise that you would eventually come to David Lynch and also to The Wizard of Oz. But could you just share with us how you arrived at this project?
Sure. I mean, it's very sort of organic. I think there's, I would say very definitely a very intuitive component to my process of, I feel that, projects kind of reveal themselves over time as, this needs to be the next project, or, something happens serendipitously that leads to a project. There's a very organic sort of aspect to things. And I've always trusted that, I've always sort of followed, my heart, I guess, in that, and lo and behold, we've got 11 features now. It's I've got 2 more that we're about to start working on. So it's been an interesting journey. But at the end of the day, I mean, I would say it's all curiosity. I'm very, I've been a cinephile since I was a kid, and I'm certainly not a trained film studies person. I'm not a film historian. I'm just a film geek, and clearly I have a very sort of unique way of looking at movies, I guess, or details in movies. But everybody does,
Right.
And I think for me, in retrospect, because that certainly was not, it was never the grand plan, but it's in retrospect, I look at, the films we've made, and I think they're a little bit of a bridge between, cinema studies, which tends to be intimidating, I think, for most people,
Right.
or that most people tend to think of as really, complicated, which it can be, and dry, which it can be. And then the general public, so to me, they're films about films. I don't like to call them film essays. I don't like to call them documentaries. They're films about films. And by this, I mean they have to be cinematic experiences. The films that we make are designed to be first and foremost enjoyed in a movie theater. They're cinematic experience. They have sound design. They have production values. They're big movies about movies, right? I mean, of course, not everybody can get to watch them on the big screen, but that's always the intent, And so to me, they're about, hopefully transmitting this passion, this sort of nerdy passion that I have for film, and to make them accessible, to make people who are not, who don't have a PhD in cinema studies, to go, oh my gosh, cracking open the shower scene is really fun. Like maybe I can do that by myself, with other films, because that's the fun. I mean, when you get to really dive into the great movies, every single time you watch them or rewatch them, you're going to find something new, and that's the joy.
Absolutely. And so when you come to a project like this, do you what was that kind of aha moment that led you to it? Do you say, oh, I want to, it's time to think about, I want to do something on David Lynch or The Wizard of Oz, or did that moment exist, or was it kind of a slow process that you were kind of thinking about trying to find your way in?
No, the moment always exists, but I never remember the moment. It's very strange. I never remember the day when I went, that's it, we're doing Lynch Oz. It's almost like I've always wanted to make Lynch Oz, if that makes any sense. It's weird. It's weird. So I do know that clearly I've been thinking about it for a while, and then eventually it becomes kind of this evidence that this film has to be made. And Lynch Oz, I mean, obviously the connections have been floating around in culture for a while, and fans have been talking about, these possible connections for a while. But I entered that film. It felt right to me. It felt like the right way to get into, the works of David Lynch, and to get into The Wizard of Oz, to put that sort of unique, different lens, on them both. But I had no guarantee that this was going to be a feature, that there was enough meat on the bones there. But it felt right. That I never questioned it. In the moment we opened that door and went down the rabbit hole, my God, I mean, yeah, then it was very clear that it was going to be a feature, and that we would actually have to rein it in and not make it a 3-hour film.
Yes, one of the things that struck me most in watching it was how you contextualized, as you say, kind of these parallels that fans and also Lynch himself has drawn, right? I mean, you can't watch Wild at Heart and not see Oz. And so I'm wondering, how that maybe was like an easy way in, but I imagine it was also a challenge, right? To avoid kind of just being too on the nose and trying to say something totally new. Is that true? And how did you navigate that existing discourse and connection, as you said, about making this?
Yeah, no, I never worry about those things, because it's, it's not about the obvious connections. It's not about, again, this is not a DVD extra. This is not about, pointing, oh, look, here's a nudge, or, oh, look, here's a nod, which, by the way, is kind of what Wild at Heart does. I mean, the characters in Wild at Heart, I've seen The Wizard of Oz. They reference The Wizard of Oz constantly, and I would absolutely make the argument that it's the least Ozian of all of David Lynch's films. It is the most in your face referential, but the reason I don't worry about it is because it's all the subconscious references, all the ways in which David Lynch taps into The Wizard of Oz without necessarily knowing he's stepping into The Wizard of Oz. That's what's interesting to me. And because now what you have is a film that speaks to not just Lynch and Oz, but it goes way, way beyond that, and goes into, the mysteries of influence and inspiration on the creative process, which is what Lynch Oz is about. And so when you get into that, when you start tapping into that, there's no end to it. You can only scratch the surface just like I've said many times, after making 7852, I felt like that was just a starting point into the shower scene. But there's many more films about the shower scene that I could do, that I probably will do, at some point. And I could do shower film scenes for the rest of my life and have a full, interesting, compelling, fulfilling life. Because once you start tapping into these extraordinary movies and moments that literally have no bottom, it's just all fun and discovery from there.
I would be eager to hear from you more generally. What are some of the films and filmmakers that have been influential in how you think about your own work? Like, is there a tradition that you see yourself working in and following?
No. And okay, let me take a step back. I'm certainly not suggesting that I haven't been deeply influenced by filmmakers, but I certainly don't look at it in terms of, I'm part of this particular school or way of thinking or whatever. I don't look at it that way. For me, it's all about, it's an emotional influence. And to me, it starts from there. It starts from the heart. It starts from a passion. It starts from being moved by a film. And when I'm moved by a film, I'm going to go rewatch it and rewatch it and rewatch it. I often say that, movie watching is movie rewatching. You haven't really watched a great film unless you start rewatching it. And the great films can be watched over and over and over and over again, and every single time you're going to see something new. So no, it's not a school, but I will say certainly Hitchcock is my hero, 100%. I will say that Vertigo is my movie. It's always going to be my movie. I'm working on a film on Vertigo. It's going to be put on hold a little bit because we've got 2 other projects we're working on right now. But that's a very important film that I've wanted to make for a long time. And, I need to make a film about Vertigo. There's no question about it. But there's so many movies that have affected me. If you want to sort of talk about what is my Wizard of Oz, if we make the argument that the Wizard of Oz was, potentially the most influential film, I would say more than potentially, probably the most influential film on David Lynch. What are the films that have been most influential to me outside of Vertigo? I will say certainly Blade Runner. I will say certainly Solaris. Those 3 for me are, they're way up there. Very recently, in recent years, I watch mostly old films, but obviously I try to, to keep up as much as I can, but I Lost My Body, I thought was a sublime film. I was really, really impressed and moved by Marcel the Shell with Shoes On, which is sort of a really mystical, mystical animated faux documentary. Come on, like it's so awesome that films like this get made in the first place. I always point to a lot of silent films, like Gaunt's, the Wheel, La Roue, which is a 7.5 hour, silent melodrama, which I think is one of the greatest films ever made. It's endless,
Yeah.
And of course, David Lynch, like Lost Highway and Mulholland Drive. Those are, especially Mulholland Drive. That's the film that I've seen. I know for sure more than 70 times. I've done lots of like sort of, live stop-start deconstructions of the film, and, talked about the film a lot and taught classes on the film. And, it's one of the most important films for me.
What is a live deconstruction? Like what does that entail? That sounds fascinating.
So basically you play the film in a theater, obviously with a crowd, and you sort of deconstruct it, not necessarily shot by shot, but you play the film, and every time you want to say something, you pause, and every time and then you encourage the audience to do the same thing. When there's something that they see or they want to comment on, they say stop, and you pause the film. And so it becomes this very interactive, conversation. And, usually it'll take you 5-6 hours to go through the film, so it's fun.
Yeah, that sounds great. I think Roger Ebert used to do something similar, right?
Yeah. I remember going to Boulder in my, a couple of times, and I went to see a couple of his deconstructions, and they were wonderful. I mean, that was such a great thing, and then it inspired me to do some of those as well. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and you can kind of see how you're kind of doing something. Deconstruction obviously is a huge part of a lot of your filmmaking, and so from that kind of more critical lens, are there any films about films, or maybe even written critics, who are kind of influential in how you think about the kind of analysis and discussion of cinephilia and this emotional connection to film that you explore, that have been influential in your work?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that they were necessarily influential in my work, mm-hmm. but I absolutely have to talk about my buddy Rodney Asher, who I just love as a human. He's just incredible. And my relationship with Room 237, which has changed over time. And mm-hmm. I don't know how much I actually told him about this, but the first time that I watched Room 237, I didn't get it, and I don't know if to say that it rubbed me the wrong way is the right way to put it, but I was a little bit sort of perturbed by it because of these, just completely crazy theories, right, on Shining and I'm like, well, who are these people? They're not film experts. They're conspiracy theories. Essentially is what they are. But and it's interesting because it didn't occur to me until, it took me a long time really to sort of understand that this is very specifically Rodney's obsession. It's not that he adheres to these theories and these people and the way that they're thinking, but that he's fascinated by the way these people think, and that he's willing to present those theories to us and to remove himself from that process and say, well, this is what happens when you watch a film over and over and over again. And then to leave it to us to figure out, is this overthinking? Is there something to it there? Is this completely crazy? What is it? And I think it's such a beautiful way to do it. And I think in a way you could call it influential on me in the sense that every time that I approach a film about film, I obviously first of all, you have to make decisions about how you're going to approach the film, how you're going to structure the film, and who's going to be a part of the universe of this film about film that you're making. And so when you interview those people and you invite them to participate, and they start opening their world and their perspective, and they start sort of taking you places, because that's the point of the exercise, is you want them to take you places. You want them to hold your hand and say, I'm going to take you now through, David Lynch's films. I'm going to take you through The Wizard of Oz, and I'm going to show you what I see. And that, to me, is my passion. My passion is to have the privilege to pick the brains of people who are cinephiles, great, film thinkers, filmmakers, craftsmen, craftspeople. I mean, just people who understand film and who clearly view it in a very different way. And to try and reevaluate or see those films that I love deeply through a completely different lens. And that process is endless. And in a way, even though I tend to go for people who are quote unquote experts, and Rodney tends to go to people who are not, but who are equally passionate,
right?
About that. It's that passion that I think he taps into a different kind of passion. But the fact that we both tap into the passion for film, for uncovering, for discovering, for deconstructing film, I think that's the exercise. And so, when you're dealing with David Lynch, which is unexplainable, that obviously you don't want to even attempt to try to explain, because that you're never going to. To be able to venture, down the mysteries, of David Lynch, to do it with somebody like Rodney Asher, to me was so fitting and so kind of perfect. And I just love the way that, without giving it away, but his chapter is so crazy and dark. And I feel like completely untethers you as you watch the film, and you don't even know what's real or what's not anymore, which is so fitting,
And so to continue again with Rodney Asher, your film features several collaborators, narrators, Karen Kusama, John Waters, Amy Nicholson, Davey Lowery, to name a few. And so what was the scripting and collaborative process like for that? Are you just walk us through that process? Who's doing the writing? How are you working with them, etc.?
Yeah, so it was a multi-step process. I mean, this is a film that I started working on basically when COVID started scaring the world. I mean, we're talking like March 2020. So we were all sort of on lockdown. We couldn't be in the same room. So I knew everything had to be remote. And so first, obviously, I had to find people who were willing to go down that rabbit hole with me, like to completely commit to this crazy idea of, let's explore Lynch and Oz, and what do we find? What do we see, right? And so the first part is what I call a jazz interview. I would get them on the phone, and between the first one was about 90 minutes, and the last one was about 3.5 hours. The longest one was about 3.5 hours. That's kind of the range of the length of the interviews that I had. And I was kind of fishing, for their thesis, their theories. And, we went on all kinds of, we were riffing, on Lynch and Oz. And to me, the trick here is to follow them where they want to take you, even if they don't necessarily know where they want to take you. But when they start hinting at certain things, you want to sort of encourage them to go in those different places and see where they're going to, eventually sort of take you. So, like I said, between 90 minutes, 3.5 hours, depending on the person that I interviewed. And then, when I felt like, okay, I've got enough material here, I've got enough meat on the bones, we just hung up and transcribed the interview. And then using that, I wrote what I felt was their chapter, essentially their thesis, and send that to them for approval, comments. We usually went back and forth a few times. They deleted a few things, added a few things. I made suggestions. I'm like, well, how about we add this? Could you mention such and such film or such and such filmmaker? But ultimately, we came to a point of agreement. Like, this is it. We're happy with this chapter. I send them back to the recording studio at that point, in the proper recording studio, and they re-recorded their voiceover, and that's what you have in the film.
And what is the relationship between the image and the voices? Did visual choices come to shape and inform the edit of the script, or could you just speak to kind of when you're in the editing room, what is that give and take like?
Well, the choice of clips came in very early at the scripting stage. So as I was working on their, again, what I thought was their chapter, their thesis, I was already starting to very actively think about, clip use, and you have to think about it on a very, very, very micro level, literally sentence by sentence, moment by moment, thinking visually, how can I illustrate this micro moment? Because if you can't do it, you don't have a film, So I worked really hard in thinking already visually, before I presented the script to them, so that I knew that I was going to be able to do something with it. And then after that, then it's a very close collaboration with David Lawrence, who is my editor on this film. He also did the Leap of Faith, a film on The Exorcist. He's an incredible, film thinker and filmmaker and film geek, and he brought so much, to the table as well, and so many more, ideas and clips that I hadn't thought of, and it becomes a conversation, and then sometimes you've got, you also have you're literally auditioning clips. You've got several possibilities for this micro moment. So which one is going to tell the most compelling story? Which one is the best fit? So it's a very very painstaking process. And it becomes a conversation, and then sometimes you've got you also have you're literally auditioning clips. You've got several possibilities for this micro moment. So which one is going to tell the most compelling story? Which one is the best fit? So it's a very very painstaking process.
Your film is, for those of us lucky enough to live in New York, I know it's opening at the IFC Theater on June 2nd, and a David Lynch retrospective is currently going on. I actually have tickets to see Fire Walk with Me tonight, so thank you for thank you for helping inspire that in 35 millimeter. So I owe you big time.
Dude.
Yeah,
Lucky
I can't
you.
wait. I can't wait. But my question goes back to something that you mentioned earlier, which was kind of your commitment to making sure that your films are shown in a theater and have that experience.
Yeah.
So what does that look like from a production standpoint? Like how are you thinking about that in the process of creating? And I apologize, this is a really obvious question, but I would just be curious to know.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's beyond the film clips themselves. It's about making sure that for me, the basic question is, am I making a film which I feel comfortable asking people to give whatever, $15 to enter a dark theater and enjoy on the big screen? And that has to be, the answer has to be yes. To me, it's a really big thing. It's a big ask of anybody, and I hope every filmmaker asks that question, because that's the contract. The unspoken contract with the audience is you're asking them to come into this dark place for a good chunk of time, and you're promising an experience. So it has to be an experience. And Lynch is obviously very, very clip driven. I mean, much more so than any other film that I've made, by virtue of the fact that it is a pandemic film. But I still have this cinematic opening and closing sort of sequence, which to me is about setting the stage between, sort of introducing in an interesting way the sort of very thin membrane that exists between Oz and Lynch. By you've got the emerald curtains of Oz and that turn into the red curtains of Lynch, but also this idea that I wanted to provide an experience that was in a way referencing transcendental meditation. So you're sort of going to take you beyond the emerald curtains, beyond the red curtains, into a deeper and deeper and deeper state and understanding or connection with Lynch and Oz, and then we're going to sort of bring you back home into the theater as the lights come up. I mean, that was the sort of the design of it, and that's why Amy Nicholson, when you go through the curtains the first time, they're emerald, and then they're red, and then you come out again for the emerald curtains back into the theater, and then the credits roll.
One of the things that's very interesting in this film is I've been interested to hear about kind of the tone of it and how you thought about it, because you kind of rightly, I think, present yourselves right as kind of outsiders trying to interpret these films and this artist who you love, but you never try to like pretend, like you have to be authoritative without saying like, oh, we know this for sure and we are inside David Lynch's head and this is a fact, right? So there's this, yeah, right. And it's, there's this poetic quality to it, and which the film achieves brilliantly. And so I'm just curious how you thought about that, because it's obviously very important, right?
Oh, 100%. I think if I thought I had the answers, it'd be really boring. And I think, but I think that's true of life. People who always claim to know the answers. I know what the problem in this country is. I know how I'm going to fix this. I know how we're going to do this. It's boring, and it's wrong-headed. I mean, look. I think as humans, we need to really come to terms with the fact that we don't know anything. And I'm not saying by this that we shouldn't listen to scientists. I think that the great tragedy of our time is we're not listening to scientists. I mean, there are people out there who work very hard to provide just basic elements that help save lives, right? We should listen to those people. I mean, there's a reason why we go to experts. I'm certainly not suggesting that there are no experts. There are experts in every single field. But the experts are people who study, who work hard, who work on very specific things. When your car breaks down, you go to a garage. You don't go to a baker, right? I mean, it's just a basic fact of life. But beyond that, life is full of mysteries, and we know so little about why we're here, where we're going, what we're doing on this rod hurtling through space. Is there a God? Is there no God? Or whatever. We can all have our beliefs and our faith, and I think that's absolutely wonderful. But to me, the mysteries is what it's about, and so I think it would be extraordinarily pompous of me to approach something like Lynch Oz and say, that's it, I've cracked the code. You must look at the films of David Lynch through the Wizard of Oz and you will understand him. That's BS. It's BS. It's like all these, and I'm not going to name names, but there you see these things on YouTube. It's like, that's it. I've figured out how to crack Mulholland Drive. Well, good for you. You've cracked a way for you to understand Mulholland Drive. That's fine. But, we need to stop trying to go after intent. The greatest filmmakers, I mean, look, I spent a lot of time with William Friedkin, right, working on Leap of Faith. And, there's these wonderful moments when he says, why does the clock stop? I don't know. It just felt right. Why does the opening shot, go from black and white to color? I don't know. It felt like the right thing to do, And so but that's it, So to me, it's really more about exploring the mysteries and realizing that there are mysteries and deepening those mysteries, because in the mysteries, that's where the fun is. To not know what life is about is what makes life beautiful. If we knew everything about life, I mean, my gosh, it'd probably be terrifying.
Absolutely. I can't wait to see this film again, and I also really can't wait to see your Vertigo film whenever you're able to give us that. So thank you so much for.
But yeah, we'll get to that eventually. There'll be a couple of others before we get to that one. So
amazing. Well, I can't wait for those two. Thank you so much again for taking the time to talk with me. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
My pleasure. Likewise. Thank you so much.
The Video Essay Podcast is hosted and produced by me, Will DeGravio. I also edited today's episode. Emily Subin-Coe is our show's associate producer. Music by Ketsa. Learn more at thevideoessay.com.